All right, well, big tech worked very hard to get close to President Trump, but that relationship does not seem to be paying off, at least for them so far this year, whether it's the tariffs hitting their businesses or an aggressive DOJ putting them under the microscope for anything merger related. Where does tech stand with the Trump administration? Let's bring in Adam Kovacevich, the CEO of the Chamber of Progress, which is a tech industry group. And he was, by the way, formerly the head of Google's U.S. policy strategy, somebody who interacted a lot with the Washington, D.C. circuit. Adam, it's great to have you here to shed some expertise on what's going on right now. What exactly do you read for what we've seen for these tech CEOs visiting the White House and what it means for the future of their policies and their businesses given the Trump administration?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that tech CEOs learned from Trump's first term is that it was better to approach Trump with honey rather than vinegar, right? That it was better to have a direct relationship with the president and, be able to talk with him directly. And I think we've seen several CEOs do that. The flip side of that is that companies have seen that Trump can be punitive, can be retaliatory, and there is a little bit of anxiety and fear, frankly, about being too candid. And I think one of the things you see, for example, is while there's a lot of excitement about things like the deregulatory steps that Trump has taken around things like the SEC lawsuits against the crypto industry and telling Europe to kind of knock off some of its protectionist regulation of U.S. tech companies, frankly, I think companies are unwilling to really voice the anxiety that they have about the tariffs and the downstream impact that's having on their investment plans, hiring plans, M&A activities. And I think that's because any individual company fears speaking up about that.
Is there, any presidency, any president of the United States has to have at least a good working relationship with the business leaders of this country. There's no doubt about that. But these particular CEOs in this time for us seem to all either have the president on speed dial or the president has them on speed dial. There's a lot of speed dialing. We just saw Jeff Bezos and President Trump apparently have a conversation, not face to face, but over the phone with regard to some of the reporting that was done about Amazon and possible tariff pricing. What exactly is that dynamic like when you navigate or have to advise people about how to approach a relationship with the president?
Absolutely. Well, so I think it's very important to say that one of the things I heard a lot from companies during the Biden years was that they didn't really have a lot of direct access to the president. There were people in the Biden administration, particularly at the SEC and the FTC, who kind of took the view that meeting with companies was sort of inherently problematic, right? Because it would cause them to somehow be co-opted by those companies. And so I wouldn't underestimate just how appreciative companies are of having an open channel. At the same time, I think there is a concern that companies can't necessarily be completely honest in those conversations about how they feel about things like tariffs or regulations because of a fear of kind of getting crosswise with Trump. So I do think, yes, they have an open channel, but they're not necessarily having a communication of 100% candor.
Your group, Adam, is about 4 years old now, the Chamber of Progress. Why did you start it? What is it? What are your goals?
Well, I started this because I am a pro-tech Democrat, and I was getting concerned with kind of the direction that Democrats were taking on technology policy issues, right? Where I sort of grew up in the party of Obama, where he kind of associated himself with Silicon Valley. And I think most, even Democratic voters, are generally pro-technology. But frankly, I think, I was pretty dismayed by the direction that the Biden administration took against tech. I think they assumed there was more support for kind of taking a hostile posture against tech. But you got to remember, these are services that Americans love, like Amazon, Google, Apple. These are some of the most popular companies in the country. And yet there was an element of the Biden administration that kind of felt that there was, some benefit to targeting those companies. They launched all these antitrust lawsuits. They now have antitrust lawsuits against, all 4 or 5 of the big tech companies. Some of those cases are going on right now.
What's ironic about that, Adam, is now you get the Republican administration, which is carrying on the work.
Yeah, that's right. That's completely right. And I think because so many people in Silicon Valley were so frustrated with Biden's hostility at the beginning of Trump's term, there had been kind of a hope, right, that this would be better. And again, to give credit where it's due, the regulatory things he's done on the SEC, around Europe, AI, like that's been welcome. But at the same time, all the antitrust cases have continued, right? You got trials going on this week against both Meta and Google, and the tariffs are just causing massive uncertainty for companies. And so yes, I mean those things are definitely negative.
Does that surprise you?
Tech is concerned.
Do you think the tech world is taken aback by this after having kind of just, I don't want to say come out to support Trump in many ways, that they're surprised that it seems like this is still a very populist presidency?
Well, I wouldn't overstate it. The reality is that most big companies didn't endorse a candidate and kind of understood that they'd have to work with whoever won. Obviously, there were high-profile Trump supporters in tech. There were also high-profile Harris supporters in tech. But when you look at like most of the kind of the big company CEOs, most of them stayed pretty quiet during the election. And so I think they've gotten to the point where they kind of know, look, we're going to have to work with whoever is in charge. That's going to ping pong back and forth based on kind of the close margin in American politics. And so let's kind of just let's establish principles that we can kind of live with no matter who is in the White House.
Yeah, and then there's the whole campaign against Harvard. And I only bring it up because I read here that your first advocacy campaign came as an undergraduate at Harvard, where you led a successful campaign to bring grapes back to Harvard's dining halls. How quaint that must now seem against the challenges that college campuses are facing. What do you make of the way Harvard is fighting back? Do you support what they're doing?
Well, I do. I do, because I do think academic independence and being able to operate your institution in a way that makes sense is really kind of it's such an important value for universities to defend. That's not to say that universities don't need reform. They do need reform. I hope universities take steps to reform themselves and make themselves better, more inclusive places, things like that. But I think protecting their own independence is really a clear line they have to defend.
What exactly, Adam, before we let you go, what exactly is going to make you more constructive about the future for Silicon Valley vis-a-vis this Trump administration and this White House?
Well, look, here's the thing. They've said a lot of great things, but then they've done other things to undermine the things they've said, right? They say we got to go beat China. And then Trump's decided not to enforce the law that, requires divestiture of TikTok, right? They said that we've got to win, that we want to win the global tech race, but then they have all these antitrust suits against our companies who are going to be the ones to win those races. They said we want to reduce dependence on foreign semiconductor manufacturing, but then he said he wants to scrap the CHIPS program, right? They say they want to build more nuclear, and then DOGE scraps the office that's going to build that, right? So I want their action to match their rhetoric. And I think if that happens, then I think there'll be a, kind of rising support for what Trump's doing within the Valley.
All right. Adam Kovacevich of the Chamber of Progress, a group that lobbies around Washington, D.C. for the tech business. Thank you very much. We'll see you soon. Please keep us updated.